Hello everyone, my name is Chess Tactics and in this video I'm going to show you how to move every chess piece. First of all, this is the first video on my channel. So if you end up liking this video, then please hit the subscribe button and the bell icon and also like this video to support me. Okay, let's get right into it. So, first what you have to know is that there are 6 types of pieces in chess. I'm highlighting them here. They are the queen, the king, the bishop, the knight, and the rook, and the pawn, like this. Okay, so now that we know what type of pieces are in the chess game, let's see how the position starts. The starting position is exactly like this, and it is white to move. Yeah, so how do we move the pieces in the first place? We will see that in this video. One thing to note is that if you're white and your pawns are on the second rank, note this number right here. See this number on this? Yeah, that's the rank number. And if you're black and your pawn is on the seventh rank, then you can move your pawn one square or two squares like this. Let's see that white moves two squares with his pawn, and white can also move one square with his pawn like this. Now, one thing to note is, for example, black plays move. Then white cannot move two squares with his pawn because his pawn is already moved away from the second rank, and a pawn cannot go back because it can only move forward like this. So the pawn can only move one square now. Okay, now that we know how to move the pawn, now let me just show you black. This also applies for black. Okay, now that we've seen how to move the pawns, we can see how to capture with the pawns. The pawn is a very special piece when it comes to capturing because, unlike most pieces, it cannot capture the way it moves. For example, these moves. Now, normally a pawn can only go forward one square once it is moved, but this time the white pawn can capture the black pawn moving one square diagonally forward like this. The same thing applies for black. For example, like this, and white plays some random pawn move, and black can also captures white pawn like this. And one thing to note is that white can play this, and black cannot move this pawn anymore because normally the pawn can only move forward, and black cannot capture white's pawn because it can only capture in these two squares. So the black pawn is considered stuck because there is a piece in front of it and it cannot get rid of that piece. So the black pawn is stuck currently. Okay, so now we can move to our next piece, which is the rook. And yes, I also know that there are a few special tricks you can do with pawns, such as promotion and en passant, but I'll be covering them in separate videos next. Okay, now that we are done with pawns and how they move and how they capture, we can move to the next piece, which is the rook. The rook basically can move in horizontal and vertical lines like this. Oops, sorry. It can move like this. It cannot go diagonally, and another piece goes diagonally, but we'll talk about that later. So the rook can basically move like this. For example, it can go here. And one thing to note is that the rook cannot jump over the opponent's pieces. For example, the rook has to go to h7. This is the square h7. So the rook cannot jump over this black pawn, and the rook is forced to capture this black pawn if it wants to go to h7. Actually, it's not forced to capture, but you better capture. And like the other pieces that come after it, it can capture the way it moves. For example, the rook can move in horizontal and vertical lines, so it captured in a horizontal line. Okay, so let's move to the next piece, which is the bishop. As you can see, I've put two bishops. Now you may ask, why I put two bishops? It is basically because the bishop can only move in diagonals like this, and so it is stuck on the square that it starts on. Now, because the bishop cannot go to any dark square like this or like this or this or this or this or this, it is stuck on the light squares. The same goes for the dark square bishop, but it is stuck only on the dark squares. Bishops can move diagonally like this, for example, and bishops can also capture diagonally like this. It's pretty simple. Now we move on to the queen, and we'll cover the knight later. The queen is basically the fusion of the rook and the bishop. So it can move in horizontal and vertical lines like this. Why do I always make that mistake? Yeah, it can move in horizontal and vertical lines like this, and it can also move diagonally like this. Okay, so the queen is the most powerful piece because it can, it's obvious because it's a fusion of the rook and the bishop, and there is also a thing called a points in chess that is assigned to every piece, but we'll talk about that in another video. So the queen is the most powerful piece. Why? Because it can move like this. And actually, it's checkmate right now because black's king is trapped, but we'll see that on our king piece thing. Okay, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. Now that we've seen that, let's move on to the knight. Now, normally, what we see is that a piece cannot jump over the opponent's piece or its own color teammate. But the knight is an exception. Basically, the knight moves in an L shape like this. That's an L shape. And the most interesting thing about a knight is that it can jump over other pieces. Now, if I ask you if the knight can go to f6, which is this square, what would you say? Well, when we trace an L pattern like this, it appears that the pawn is in the way of the knight, and so the knight cannot go to f6. But actually, the knight can jump over that pawn like that, and then it can also attack the king, and it also attacks the pawn, so the knight can jump over its own pieces and its enemy pieces, and that makes it very special, and it is also the only piece that moves in a L pattern like that. Now that we are done seeing the knight, we can move to the most important piece on the chessboard. The queen is the most powerful piece, while the king is the most important piece. Basically, if your king gets attacked by an enemy piece and cannot protect itself, then it's something called checkmate. But I'll cover it in another video. So basically, how the king moves, the king can move one square in each and every direction like this. The king can go to basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares at this moment. The king can go to 8 squares. So very simple movement the king has. It can go to one square in every direction if it's not attacked by the enemy. For example, the king cannot go to this square d4 because the enemy pawn is attacking that square, and that is why, and the king cannot put itself in an attack. When an enemy piece attacks the king, it is called a check, but uh, I'll go over that in another video. Okay everyone, now that we are done seeing how each and every chess piece moves, we can end the video right here. Remember, if you end up liking this video, you can smash the subscribe button, and then you can hit the bell, and you can also like this video, and you can also comment down below to give me your opinion of my video. Thank you.